seriously. We also know that there have been various attempts, including more recent ones, to put a spin on this to say, there's nothing to it. That's a bunch of baloney.
The results of the Soviets' most far-reaching secret UFO study became public in the year 2000. The inquiry started in 1978 and took 13 years to complete. The investigative team consisted of top scientists and military experts and was completely clandestine.
Certainly, this collaboration between the Academy of Sciences and the Ministry of Defense was not paraded. I mean, formally, these studies were closed. Classified organizations took part in these studies. This research should have a secret character.
Colonel Boris Sokolov was the coordinator of the investigation. Shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, he met with American investigative journalist George Knapp.
Sokolov told us that just as in America, 90 to 95% of these cases could be explained away, but the remaining 5 to 10% could not be easily explained.
The 13-year Soviet UFO study scrutinized some of the most puzzling sightings in Russian history. In 1968, a cameraman documenting a test of a Soviet jet fighter noticed a huge triangular object in the sky. He focused his camera on the object and caught it on film. In 1977, an unusual aerial display sent tentacles of light streaming down over the town of Petrozavodsk. Some claim the event caused fine holes to be glazed in glass windows and concrete. In 1982, military personnel at an intercontinental ballistic missile base witnessed several brilliantly lit orbs overhead. Seconds later, a warning light indicated a missile had switched to the prepare to launch mode. Had an alleged UFO come close to starting a nuclear attack? UFO sightings over Russia are not limited to the recent past. Reports of peculiar-looking airborne objects date back centuries. However, no formal investigations were undertaken until the early 20th century, when an event of epic proportions demanded analysis. Tunguska, July 30th, 1908. In a remote area of Siberia, the morning calm was rocked by an explosion. The powerful blast was heard 1,000 miles away.
There was an enormous fireball blast, something on the order of 15 megatons of equivalent energy, which is roughly 1,000 times that of the Hiroshima blast at the end of the Second World War. This was an extraordinary event.
Because of the remoteness of the Tunguska region, it was almost 20 years before any government researchers visited the site. The first expedition to reach Tunguska was headed by Russian mineralogist Leonid Kulik.
When the initial expedition got to the Tunguska area in 1927, the natives were reluctant to show the scientists into the region because they thought the god Agdi had devastated the area because of the wickedness that was going on, and he had destroyed the trees, killed the animals.
Kulik eventually convinced locals to direct him to the blast location. Believing a meteorite had caused the massive explosion, Kulik assumed he would find a crater at the point of the meteorite's impact. To his surprise, there was none.
He looked for meteorite samples on the ground because often when an object hits the Earth, it throws up debris, and the debris is recoverable around the edges of the crater. But of course he didn't find that either.
What Kulik discovered has stirred UFO debate for decades. At the blast's epicenter was a frozen swamp with an untouched clump of fully grown trees in the middle. Circled around the grove, 10 million dead trees lay in a symmetrical ring, seemingly mowed down by a cosmic scythe.
So here we have an enormous blast site with no crater, no fragments or meteorites around the rim of the crater, and this radial pattern of burnt trees knocked down for some 20 miles in all directions.
In the years that followed, others traveled to Tunguska to study the unusual occurrence.
There might have been fruits obtained by labors of another expedition sent by the head of the Soviet secret police in the late 1940s. But all we know is that such expedition existed. We do not know what has happened to the items and the information it collected.
Further baffling ufologists were reports of radiation damage in the Tunguska blast region.
There were also some reports of mutations taking place in plant life, and even some humans apparently suffered some gene damage.
In 1947, Russian Army Colonel Alexander Kazantsev developed a remarkable theory based on information about the devastating consequences of America's atomic bomb attacks on Japan.
He was listening to the report about the nuclear bombardment. The announcer gave a very long and very detailed description of how and in which direction trees, houses had fallen, and so on, how everything was hit. He realized that what had happened in Hiroshima, exactly the same happened at Tunguska, only nearly half a century ago.
Kazantsev hypothesized that the nuclear-like devastation seen at Tunguska must have been caused by the crash of a nuclear-powered alien spacecraft. But the scientific community rebuffs the UFO theory. Scientists claim the Tunguska explosion was caused by a rare but explainable natural event. They believe an asteroid dropped to just 3 miles above the Earth's surface and then exploded.
As the object came in, it was being decelerated and squeezed by atmospheric forces. It blew up with the force of a hydrogen bomb. The shock wave smashed down the forest, knocking trees away from the blast and resulting in a pattern away from ground zero.
But how would an asteroid explosion explain the reports of radiation damage in the Tunguska area? Scientists say it can be attributed to the sheer magnitude of the explosion.
As we mentioned before, the blast itself was 1,000 times greater than the Hiroshima blast at the end of World War II. The blast would have generated a series of very high-speed charged particles and would have been the cause of some of the mutations in the gene structures of plants and animals.
But to this day, scientific explanations do not satisfy many ufologists.
I have been several times to the place where the Tunguska body fell. I intentionally call it body, not meteorite. I mean, the catastrophe of an asteroid, of a comet, or of any other natural body cannot lead to such consequences.
A number of expeditions found things that they couldn't explain. There are some people who were saying that the evidence suggested this was some kind of an alien spaceship. That was the kind of magical explanation you use when you don't have enough real science to understand the physics and the astronomy involved.
Throughout the rest of the 20th century, magical explanations of unidentified flying objects over Russian skies would continue. And in one instance would help expose a top-secret Soviet military project. It was 1948. World War II was over, but the Cold War was just beginning. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin had initiated the Berlin blockade and directed his scientists to develop a nuclear weapon to rival that of the United States. It was during this period that some claim Stalin grew concerned about UFOs. It is said his interest stemmed from reports of a 1947 UFO incident in Roswell, New Mexico.
New Mexico in 1947 would have been a hotbed of Soviet espionage because we had all kinds of stuff there. The 509th Bomber Wing, the only atomic bomber wing group.
Purportedly, Stalin ordered Sergei Korolev, the founder of the Russian space program, to analyze information about the supposed Roswell crash and report his findings.
Mr. Korolev came up with an answer. Yes, UFOs exist. No, they present no immediate threat.
And after evaluating the information, all that the Russians had acquired on Roswell and on UFOs, Korolev concluded UFOs are real. They appear to be intelligently controlled. That's what he told Stalin, and Stalin in turn said, that's what my other people have concluded as well.
While concrete proof of the conversation does not exist, several Soviet scientific agencies did begin investigating UFOs in the ensuing years.
Stalin, after getting this information about Roswell and UFOs in general, did the same thing basically that the American government had been doing. He condemns UFOs in public and then conducts secret tests behind the scenes. He had all sorts of high-level scientists who would research the problem for him and then report to military officials, all behind the scenes.
Also hidden from public view were UFO reports culled from Soviet Air Force pilots. Between the mid-1950s and mid-1960s, pilots reported approximately 15,000 UFO sightings.
It is very difficult to find a pilot who has been flying for many years and has never seen a UFO.
Most of these sightings can be easily explained. In an era of superpower distrust, flights of American spy planes and spy balloons were common over Soviet skies. But investigative journalist George Knapp, who has viewed portions of the Soviet UFO files, found some of the pilot sightings perplexing.
There were 40 instances where Russian warplanes were sent after UFOs. This is not temperature inversion, this is not a weather balloon, this is not swamp gas, these are craft floating around in the airspace of Russia, and they sent warplanes to go chase them.
While pilots continued to report strange objects in the sky, none could offer tangible evidence to support their claims. But in 1968, over the skies of Riga, Latvia, an alleged UFO sighting was caught on film. As a Soviet propaganda film crew documented a test flight of a fighter interceptor jet, the pilot noticed an unusual object high in the sky.
And suddenly the pilot shouted, "Look, film it!" We looked and saw a triangle at a tremendous height.
Fighter planes scrambled to investigate, but the object quickly disappeared behind a cloud and was never seen again. It was later estimated that the craft was hovering approximately 7 miles above the ground. The film was sent to the Kremlin, where it remained locked from public view for years.
They really took it seriously. I say seriously because the film was taken away. It was declared completely secret.
Outsiders have only recently seen the confiscated film. While some maintain the film is conclusive evidence of a UFO, skeptics argue the vehicle was most likely a French-made high-altitude research balloon. As secrecy enveloped all government discussions of UFO issues, an underground army of Soviet ufologists began to form in the USSR. They kept their studies concealed.
Russians who studied UFOs in this period report that they had a very serious feeling of threat from the Soviet government, that they were doing something which the Soviet government disapproved of.
The leader of civilian UFO research was Felix Ziegel, the man considered the father of Soviet ufology.
Felix Ziegel was a Soviet scientist. He was a doctor of mathematics and astronomy at the Moscow Aviation Institute. He made it his job to find out why are the strange objects in the skies of his country.
Ziegel challenged the Soviet system by conducting paranormal lectures, organizing independent UFO investigations, and urging Soviet citizens to report any and all sightings. His efforts were not without risk.
We cannot say, of course, that people would be put in jail for it, but still Ziegel suffered. He was harassed both in his place of work, at the Institute of Aviation, and he was harassed by the state government authorities.
Ziegel and his investigators spread information about UFO sightings through an underground press network. Samizdat, private publications used to disseminate information, were strictly forbidden by the Kremlin.
In his time, brochures were printed in a samizdat way. They were collections of observations and letters, typed in 5 to 10 copies. All materials were typed with the use of carbon paper.
Samizdat papers were distributed by trustworthy messengers who secretly carried the copies from one person to the next. UFO information circulated in this covert manner until 1967, when suddenly it seemed as if ufologists were given a reprieve from government censure. Today it appears this respite was a smokescreen, part of an intricate government deception. The complex ruse began in 1967 when citizens reported multiple sightings of crescent-shaped UFOs over the skies of the Ukraine and the lower Volga Valley.
It was also seen as far south as the Caucasus Mountains, where many astronomers in observatories in the Caucasus Mountains would see these objects flying horizontally from west to east, crescent-shaped, heading toward the east.
For reasons unknown at the time, the government allowed press coverage and independent study of the sightings. Felix Ziegel was granted permission to form a government-sanctioned investigative committee made up of over 200 scientific and military experts. In October 1967, they convened at the Central House of Aviation and Cosmonautics in Moscow. Their goal? Determine the cause of the mass sightings. On television and in newspapers, Ziegel's committee appealed to Soviet citizens to report information on UFOs. For the first time in Soviet history, UFOs seemed to be an open topic.
It was like a breath of fresh air. Freedom of discussion about a forbidden subject was permitted to the Soviet citizens. And this was something unheard of. And alas, it did not last long.
Within a few months of Ziegel's televised appeal, the steel jaws of Soviet censorship clamped down. Reporting of UFOs was once again off limits. The subject was dropped from the controlled media, and Ziegel's committee was ordered to disband.
The committee was to encourage people to report. As soon as the reports began to gather, somebody in Moscow quashed the activity, canceled the committee, canceled publication of further works, and put a lid on it.
Cries of a Kremlin whitewash were immediately sounded.
Why the cover-up takes place, I don't know. Is there a cover-up? There's no question about it.
But what they were covering up is the question. UFO buffs believe they were covering up alien visitations. I think the evidence is clear they were covering up descriptions of their own secret military aircraft and missile activities and satellite activities.
Scientist and NASA consultant James Oberg came to this conclusion in 1977 after studying Soviet space vehicle launch patterns and comparing them to the dates of the 1967 sightings. He deduced that the crescent-shaped objects witnessed in the sky were not alien in nature, but could be attributed to secret tests of a new Soviet missile warhead.
People in the area saw the rockets, especially at night, saw the streamers, the contrails in the sky, even heard the rockets. They were told by the government that there was nothing there, that it was not anything ours. It became a UFO phenomenon.
Later dubbed by the Pentagon as a fractional orbital bombardment system, the Soviets had good reason to keep the tests secret.
It was designed to sneak under our radar as a first strike weapon. It was one of these scary things that you only build it if you mean to make a sneak attack. It was also illegal to have such a weapon because in 1967, the U.S. and Russia and other countries signed a treaty forbidding the placing of nuclear weapons into orbit.
But why, after crushing public dissemination of UFO information for years, did the government briefly loosen its restrictions in 1967? It appears now to have been a deliberate ploy to fool its citizens and the international community about the true nature of the sightings.
The Soviet government did not want the public to understand what was going on. They didn't want the Americans to know, for example, what was going on. It was a useful camouflage. It diverted people's attention. Because it was a UFO, Western journalists would laugh rather than investigate it. The cover-up by the Soviet government is in letting people think they're flying saucers.
The strategy backfired when the extensive UFO data collected by Felix Ziegel's committee was published in magazines.
The Soviet government realized what these reports really were. They're military secrets. Not described accurately, but accurately enough to be of use to the CIA if they ever caught on. The government said, "Oh my gosh," and other things in Russian, and said no more UFO reports get published in the Soviet Union.
For 10 years, public discussion of UFOs was effectively brought to a halt. But that would change in 1977 with the appearance of a strange-looking object over Soviet skies, witnessed by thousands of astonished citizens. September 20th, 1977. As dawn approached in the small Russian port city of Petrozavodsk, a spectacular aerial display lit up the skies. The incident would become one of the most studied UFO sightings in Soviet history.
The phenomenon of Petrozavodsk is one of the greatest abnormal phenomena on the territory of our country.
At approximately 4 o'clock in the morning, civilians and military personnel reported seeing huge star-like apparitions shooting in the sky.
As it flew up in the sky, appeared to come over the city and then head off toward the horizon. People who were out in the streets of the town saw this blazing jellyfish streaming tentacles down from the saucer-shaped bright core.
The impressive display lasted approximately 10 minutes. Witnesses claimed that a host of strange occurrences on the ground accompanied the sighting.
They reported all sorts of phenomena. They smelled ozone, computers were crashing, drivers lost control of their vehicles and went into ditches.
Perhaps the phenomenon most difficult to explain was the appearance of finely glazed holes in glass windows and rocks around the city.
There is no explanation for this fact, but the connection is direct by the time parameters. There had been no holes before the event, and then they appeared.
Witnessed by thousands, the aerial display above Petrozavodsk was impossible to refute. While the sighting remained a mystery to Soviet citizens, NASA consultant James Oberg quickly discovered its origins.
Because of my connection with the space program and my knowledge of satellites and rockets, I was able to find out within a matter of hours. There was a rocket launching that morning from a secret space center north of Moscow at precisely the time people were seeing this UFO.
The jellyfish-like display was triggered by the launch of the Cosmos 955 spy satellite. As the rocket engine contrails were backlit by the rising morning sun, it produced the tentacle effect observed by witnesses.
So this what they call basically the smoking gun of Soviet ufology. They call it a Medusa, or jellyfish UFO, because it was streamers of light coming down from the streamers in the rocket engines of the rocket, as it turned out.
As with previous mass sightings, the government had ample reason to keep the truth hidden from Soviet citizens. The satellite was launched from a secret military space center called Plesetsk, one of several undisclosed missile bases scattered throughout the Soviet Union. Most ufologists accept the satellite launch as the cause of the aerial display, but many argue it does not fully clarify the mystery.
How shall we explain the appearance of some beams that burnt the glass? When the pieces of the glass were analyzed at the Institute of Metrology in Moscow, they concluded that these holes resulted from badly glazed window glass. That is, a purely technical defect took place.
I do not believe that the launch of a secret military satellite would explain the holes that were made in the glass. My personal opinion, no, this was not man-made technology that's responsible for such effects.
There were some reports of holes being drilled into glass window panes and in paving stones. I saw those reports. I can't explain it. And all these sorts of additional phenomena, these additional reports, are typical of what happens when people see a very sudden, shocking sight in the sky and look around them for corroborative evidence. Most of the time, it's irrelevant, independent, and sometimes even imaginary.
While the mysterious holes might never be fully explained, the Petrozavodsk incident had much deeper consequences inside the walls of the Kremlin.
The upshot of this incident was the decision of the Soviet government to create a secret program to study UFOs.
In the weeks following the Petrozavodsk sighting, the Soviet Academy of Sciences received inquiries from several European nations concerned about the nature of the event. In response, the Academy of Sciences requested permission from the Kremlin to initiate a top-secret investigation of anomalous occurrences. Although aware the majority of these events were not paranormal in nature, the scientists admitted in their request that they could not provide a scientific basis for all UFO sightings.
The Academy of Sciences can neither ignore or explain the paranormal phenomena similar to that observed in September 1977 in Petrozavodsk. The program was organized to show that we did not know the answers to these questions and would be studying it on the scientific level. That was the way the official scientific program for studying abnormal phenomena and extraterrestrial flying objects started its work in the Soviet Union.
In 1978, the investigation that later became known as Institute 22 was formally started. The study lasted 13 years and was completely concealed from public view. But why did the Soviet government spend time and money to investigate a phenomenon it already knew the origins of?
There's really no surprise that the Soviet military, even if they understood the nature of most of these reports, would still investigate them. The Soviets traditionally spied on themselves as severely as they spied on the West.
If they already knew that these are missile tests, why do they have to have a nationwide study behind the scenes? I mean, it's not like the results of the study were ever going to be published anywhere. It was a secret. So it makes no sense.
While the rationale for the beginnings of the study is still debated, there is no doubt the scope of the investigation was far-reaching. The Institute 22 inquiry was conducted jointly between the Soviet Academy of Sciences and the Ministry of Defense.
It was very useful for the Academy of Sciences to collaborate and to carry out studies together with the Ministry of Defense, because naturally it was much easier for the Ministry of Defense to get the information we had no access to.
The armed forces were ordered to study what, if any, influence possible UFOs might have on the proper functioning of technical military equipment. In addition, hundreds of thousands of sailors, soldiers, and pilots were recruited to watch for and report on UFOs. No one was told why the reports were being taken.
The Ministry of Defense has an enormous observance potential. First, military units are located all over the country. Second, unlike civil organizations, an order from the Minister of Defense is sufficient for making a potential viewer of each military man, and this was done.
Every single unit in the vast Soviet military empire had to comply with this study. That is, any UFO, any anomalous object, any ball of light, any strange thing in the sky whatsoever had to be fully investigated.
Scientists were directed to investigate the physical nature of alleged paranormal phenomenon. The data collected by the military and scientists was analyzed in a lab located in a nondescript building in a suburb of Moscow.
The personnel of the laboratory were not numerous, not more than 10 people, and this number was never exceeded. But the specialists from almost all the scientific areas worked there, from a physician to specialists in radioelectronics, meteorology, and astrogeophysics. Practically all the specialists were represented there. It was done in order to study all possible aspects of UFOs.
6 years into the study, Institute 22 would be called on to scrutinize an incident of global consequence, when a suspected UFO incident placed the world on the brink of nuclear war. The early 1980s were a time of tense relations between the Soviet Union and the West. The era of détente had ended, and the Russian landscape was studded with intercontinental ballistic missile silos. Each contained nuclear weapons aimed westward. It was at one of these silos that a reported UFO incident caused a nuclear scare. Today, this ICBM silo in the Ukraine is deserted, dismantled in compliance with a nuclear arms reduction treaty between the U.S. and USSR. But at this silo in 1982, something went terribly wrong. It started at approximately 6 p.m. when soldiers and villagers in the nearby town of Bielo-Korovichi witnessed a strange object in the dusk sky. A military officer at the time described what he saw.
I was riding a motorcycle not far from here. I saw a large object in the air. It had a perfect geometric shape.
At the same moment inside the silo, an emergency warning light indicated that a nuclear missile had switched to launch mode.
The most telling testimony comes from the communications officer who said that somehow something entered the correct code.
But Moscow had not ordered a launch, nor had any personnel in the bunker touched the control panel. For 15 agonizing seconds, technicians frantically scrambled to stop the launch. Then, without explanation, the launch sequence was aborted.
They were ready for launch. The UFO, poof, goes away. Poof, the command control module goes back to normal.
Had a UFO somehow interfered with the launch controls of a nuclear missile? A team of investigators from Institute 22, the secret state-sponsored UFO research team, was immediately ordered to the missile base.
They established within a very short period, literally half a day, that a military training exercise took place at a nearby aerial ground.
Investigators learned that the sighting occurred at the same time and in the same area where the military was testing flares. Dropped out of planes, the flares provided 5 to 7 minutes of illumination. That explained the strange display in the sky. But why did the nuclear launch sequence activate?
The fact that the emergency situation coincided with the effects which took place is certainly a remarkable coincidence, but it is still a coincidence.
The ICBM control equipment was systematically taken apart and rebuilt, but no defects were found.
It's not just an electrical malfunction. Something entered the correct launch codes. That just doesn't happen every day. We hear from our government UFOs are not a matter of national security. The Russian government has been telling its people the same thing. They're trying to confuse us. This incident is clear evidence, if ever there was, that UFOs do carry national security implications.
After examining the ICBM episode, the investigative team of Institute 22 continued to scrutinize various sightings around the country. Some who reported UFOs had a much closer view than those on Earth. Cosmonauts.
The first man in space, Yuri Gagarin, is quoted in the Thread 3 documents as saying, "I can tell you that UFOs are real, and if you allow me, I'll tell you a lot more." The second man in space, cosmonaut Titov, said that there were 7 UFOs dancing around his space capsule during his brief flight into space.
However, even to this day, most cosmonauts are reluctant to speak about any unusual phenomenon they witnessed in space.
There's a ridicule factor, there's a laughter curtain, there are career consequences from reporting a UFO and taking it seriously.
But in this rare interview obtained by the History Channel, 2 cosmonauts spoke of unusual objects they encountered in space.
Many cosmonauts have seen phenomena which are far beyond the experiences of Earthmen. For 10 years, I never spoke of such things.
Former Commander Vladimir Kovalyonik of the Salyut 6 space station revealed that on May 5, 1981, he observed an unrecognizable illuminated entity outside the porthole of his craft.
The object had an elliptical shape and flew with us. It only flew straight, but then a kind of explosion happened. It produced a golden light, very beautiful to watch. A second explosion followed, and 2 spheres appeared. As we entered the darkness of Earth's shadow, I could no longer see them.
On a Mir mission in 1991, cosmonaut Musa Manarov managed to videotape an anomalous object during a routine docking procedure.
I was looking out the biggest window. It was directly in front of me. I am familiar with the construction of all spaceships, but this was different.
There is ongoing debate about sightings of unidentified objects by cosmonauts and American astronauts alike. Skeptics insist there is enough debris left in orbit to constitute a plethora of unusual sightings. As cosmonauts traveled amidst the stars, the 1990s saw major changes take place on Soviet soil. When the walls of communism crumbled, American UFO investigator George Knapp ventured to Russia, hoping to discover just what secrets the Soviets had been hiding about alien encounters. What he found was startling. Beginning in the mid-1980s, the leaders of the United States and the Soviet Union conducted several summits aimed at reducing both nuclear arms and tensions between the two superpowers. Shortly after one such meeting, President Ronald Reagan revealed he and Mikhail Gorbachev had discussed the topic of alien encounters.
I couldn't help but say to him, just think how easy his task and mine might be in these meetings that we held if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet, outside in the universe. We'd forget all the little local differences that we have between our countries.
Reagan made 5 different public statements, including one to the United Nations, that, well, boy, wouldn't it be something if UFOs were suddenly a threat to us and we'd all get together? And so Gorbachev kind of responded, yeah, it sure would. You know, we would get together. Lo and behold, we did get together. You know, the wall came tumbling down, perestroika, glasnost.
With the collapse of the Soviet Union came a new era of openness in Russia. Thousands of miles away in Las Vegas, Nevada, investigative journalist George Knapp, who had studied many American UFO incidents, realized the time was perfect to explore Russian reports.
3 years ago, we have succeeded in obtaining several hundred pages of secret Russian UFO documents and photos. Other Western journalists followed. Today, it's a new ballgame. The lid has been dropped on government UFO files, although there is still plenty of information to be found.
It occurred to me, now may be the time to go ahead and try to find out what the Russians know about UFOs. It was a tumultuous, crazy time, but a wonderful time to be there as a journalist.
In 1993, Knapp traveled to Russia and was introduced to Boris Sokolov, the coordinator of Institute 22. Like many government-funded scientific projects from the era, Institute 22's funding had been cut and the project disbanded. Sokolov provided Knapp with some of the recently declassified UFO files, containing information on the cases that were more difficult to explain.
He had culled from the thousands of reports some of the most interesting ones and had kept them in these binders, and we were able to get them and bring them back.
Why would the Russian military study all of this stuff?
Colonel Sokolov said it was a very practical reason. They knew that UFOs could do things that their planes couldn't. Figured by studying it, they may be able to get an advantage over us in terms of stealth technology.
Upon returning to the United States, Knapp made some of the files public. As a result, Colonel Sokolov was ridiculed by some back in his homeland.
Officially, Russia was a democracy, but the communists still had a lot of influence. There were communist newspapers that attacked him broadly as being a sellout to Mother Russia.
But the public scorn Sokolov endured was certainly less severe than the consequences he might have been subject to in the old Soviet Union.
My friend put it this way. He said, if this had happened 5 years ago, we would be in prison. If it had happened 10 years ago, we'd all be shot for giving up these secrets.
But in 2000, the relaxed political climate allowed Sokolov and scientist Yuli Platov to publish a report summarizing the findings of Institute 22. Entitled The History of UFO State Research in the USSR, the report concluded that of the 3,000 UFO sightings investigated, 90 to 95% of the incidents could be attributed to man-made phenomenon, mostly missile launches and research balloons.
The remaining 5 to 10% could not be easily explained. He was not willing to conclude that any of these things were extraterrestrials or interdimensionals or aliens from the future or anything of that sort.
The thing is that before, the enthusiastic ufologists had affirmed in literature that all we saw was due to contacts with the extraterrestrial civilizations. No, no, no. It turned out that only a very small percentage of events remained unexplained.
But in a land that for so long concealed information and suppressed dialogue, many ufologists wondered if the report revealed the entire truth.
There is a vast treasure trove of KGB documents on this topic somewhere that no one has ever seen. And I know the KGB did release some documents in the early 90s, but it is presumed by a lot of folks that the best stuff is still hidden in a vault somewhere.
What happened to the files? Who keeps them? Until we ourselves go through the files.
And a lot of mystery. There's a very good reason for a whole society of creatures, sentient creatures, advanced creatures living underwater because they can, because nobody goes there.
It's fascinating to think of the underwater UFOs because they know a lot about this planet that you and I don't know.
Unique to the USO phenomenon is the reported ability of these craft to multiply and break apart. One such astounding case has become known as the Golfo Nuevo event. On February 8, 1960, the Argentinian Navy is on alert as they track two unidentified submarine-like objects in its waters, thought to be American subs. Then, according to reports, the underwater objects are seen on sonar to break apart and fly out of the water.
Sonar contact, 173, 438 yards. Bridge contact, sonar contact, 173, 438 yards.
Two gigantic submarines sighted by the Argentinian Navy in 1960 inexplicably multiplied into 6 other submarine objects. The Argentinians were never able to catch them or destroy them because the objects simply disappeared.
The case even caught the attention of the Soviet Union's most senior officials.
Nikita Khrushchev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union at the time, was so much intrigued by the whole story that he sent his diplomatic attaché in Buenos Aires to find out what's been going on.
While some researchers contend that these reported cases might be nothing more than military submarines firing torpedoes, others argue that submarines were not capable of firing 6 or more objects in 1960. Late USO researcher Ivan T. Sanderson's 1970 book, Invisible Residents, was the first to analyze the USO phenomenon. He reports on another remarkable example of USO behavior. In March 1963, the U.S. Navy submarine exercise is progressing as planned 100 miles off Puerto Rico. Suddenly, one Navy sub abruptly breaks from its assigned route after picking up an unidentified object traveling at speeds in excess of 150 knots. The submarines are astonished by the depth at which the unidentified craft is moving, 20,000 feet underwater.
It gave the acoustic signature of a single propeller type of motion through the water, and it was tracked at depths down to 20,000 feet, whereas a typical crush depth for a submarine would be 7,000 feet. So this thing, whatever it was exceeding the technical capabilities of submarines at that time and even today.
The vessel is tracked for almost 4 days by the entire carrier group. The object would reportedly propel away at impossible speeds and then stop and rest, allowing for continued tracking by the Navy. Reports about this event were sent back to Sinclair Fleet Headquarters in Norfolk, Virginia. However, an official determination into what was seen on sonar that afternoon was never made. But according to reports, the Navy lost track of the craft after midnight on the 4th day. It was never picked up on sonar again.
Nobody advanced a theory as to how something could move that fast.
We have reports of USOs going into and out of the water, but we don't have any of the technical data. Flying saucers that are above the ground, people see them. But what's underwater, the Navy sees them. And the Navy isn't talking about what it's flying.
Inflating an immense balloon aboard the USS Norton Sound, the Navy prepares for further study of the elusive cosmic rays somewhere in the Pacific. That's the news. A secondary consideration clears up the mystery of the so-called flying saucers. For it is these monsters which rise 19 miles and attain diameters of 100 feet that have been mistaken for the apparitions called flying saucers. At great altitudes, they tell us, these elongated enormities flatten out like plates. Mystery ended.
But reports from around the world continue. Another extraordinary case is reported in the international press beginning on November 11th, 1972. A fast-moving submarine-like object is picked up on sonar in the Sonja Fjord off the west coast of Norway by the Norwegian Navy, which hunts it for 2 weeks. A fleet of surface ships and specially equipped sub-hunter helicopters are assembled to find the object. On November 20th, 1972, the USO is seen visually for the first time. It was described as being a massive, silent, cigar-shaped object. A Navy ship promptly fires its guns and torpedoes at the craft.
Some ship actually saw it on the surface and fired at it, but it dived, and then they started dropping depth charges. Although all the articles treat this as a submarine, the fact of the matter is nobody was able to identify it as a submarine.
After tracking the object for almost 2 weeks, the Navy devises and executes a plan to blockade the fjord and trap the USO.
They tried to seal off this fjord so nothing could get in or out. Nevertheless, after 14 or 15 days, this thing disappeared. So that may mean that this object, whatever it was tracked by the Navy, was not a submarine at all, but an unidentified submerged object.
Coming up, did Christopher Columbus and his crew witness USOs flying into and out of the Atlantic on October 11th, 1492?
One of the earlier cases comes all the way back from the day before Columbus Day in 1492, before there was a Columbus Day. And it happened on the Santa Maria.
October 11th, 1492, 10 p.m. A calm, clear night. Christopher Columbus and his crew move slowly across one of the deepest ravines of the Atlantic and through the Bermuda Triangle. Below them is almost 4 miles of water. Suddenly, unearthly lights are seen flashing across the bottom of the ocean.
One of the earlier cases comes all the way back from the day before Columbus Day in 1492, before there was a Columbus Day. And it happened on the Santa Maria. This person's name was Gutierrez. And Gutierrez was on the Santa Maria with Christopher Columbus and noticed an object rising out of the water, a disc-shaped object.
A great flash of light with a level of brilliance unlike anything known at the time suddenly erupts from the sea to the sky, startling Columbus and his crew of 120 aboard the 3-ship Spanish fleet. In less than 5 hours, they would discover the New World.
Christopher Columbus maintained a log in the ship. It describes what could be interpreted as a UFO event. They saw, in the description given in the logbook, the flickering of a wax candle going up and down in the night. It couldn't have been a campfire on ground because it was beyond the horizon.
This possible USO incident is more than just legend and lore. For the first time ever, original text from Columbus's log has been made available to the History Channel by archivists at Fordham University, custodian of a rare handwritten copy of the journal. The October 11th, 1492 sighting was not an isolated occurrence. Over the 2-month journey, Columbus's log exhibits a consistent pattern of cryptically reported peculiar incidents, including unexplained sightings and unusual events in outer space. The following is from an entry on September 10th, 1492, the halfway point of the voyage.
The crew of the Nina stated they had seen a garajo and a water wagtail, but these birds never go farther than 25 leagues from the land.
From an entry September 11th, 1492.
Saw a large fragment of the mast of a vessel, apparently of 120 tons, but could not pick it up.
Entries on both September 17th and September 20th indicate that stars or other unidentified lights in the sky are seen to move.
The cause was that the star moved from its place, but the needles remained stationary.
And from the infamous entry of October 11th.
The Admiral, at 10 o'clock that evening, standing on the quarterdeck, saw a light. Calling to Pero Gutierrez, he told him he saw a light and bid him look that way, which he did and saw it. The admiral again perceived it once or twice, appearing like the light of a wax candle, moving up and down.
Is it possible that these strange events, recorded during the most fabled nautical journey in history, were the result of otherworldly vessels tracking Columbus's fleet? Some suggest, however, that any interpretations or rationalizations that might be gleaned from Columbus's log are not the whole truth.
If Christopher Columbus saw a strange thing come out of the water, fly around his ship, and then take off, would he have told anybody about it? They'd have locked him up in the brig instantly. The guy's crazy, because things can't do that.
One of the earliest USO reports comes from 329 BC. After witnessing what he described as shining shield-like objects flying into and out of the Jaxartes River in India, Alexander the Great was so convinced that he witnessed otherworldly vessels, he spent the final 6 years of his life searching for evidence of these objects in a diving bell, believed to be the world's first submarine. Some conclude, however, that Alexander's underwater adventures had a greater goal, finding and conquering the one kingdom that had eluded him, Atlantis.
Well, Atlantis first enters literary history in the philosophical dialogues of Plato. These are the Timaeus and the Critias.
The gods, bothered by the attitude of the Atlanteans, decided to destroy Atlantis. In one day and one night, they destroyed it with a cataclysm, and it sank.
To this day, researchers continue to speculate about Atlantis as a hub of USO activity.
The legend of Atlantis definitely is based on knowledge, probably lost by today, of some secret underwater civilization.
Atlantis's supposed location in the Mediterranean would have provided USOs a convenient position from which to monitor human civilizations and their shipping routes to and from Asia Minor, Rome, and Athens.
The Mediterranean was the cradle of ancient civilization. The Phoenician traders traveled back and forth between the Middle East and Greece across the Mediterranean. If there were a culture of either aliens or original inhabitants of planet Earth who wanted to seed the planet, to seed humanity with myth, the Mediterranean is a natural base for them to set up an underwater facility.
Well, I don't know if Plato was talking about unidentified submerged objects when he came up with Atlantis, but I suppose there are people who, number one, assume that Atlantis is real, number two, that it's somewhere in the Atlantic, number three, that's buried under thousands of feet of water.
The ancient Athenians, however, were not the first to record stories of unidentified objects in the oceans. Experts believe the ancient Egyptians may have even recorded sightings in their hieroglyphic drawings.
In ancient Egypt, in the temple at the city of Abydos, somebody made an inscription, a depiction of a submarine. There was another depiction of an object that looks like a helicopter. Who made it? How did the ancient Egyptians know about it? We have no idea.
One of the earliest European cases is a series of reported English sightings in the 11th century.
One of the oldest cases I have on the site goes back to the year 1067. It has to do with this people in the countryside seeing something flaming in the sky that came down to earth, lit up the countryside, and then went up again, and then into the sea.
Carl Feint has been researching USO phenomenon for almost a decade. His internet site, waterufo.net, has an archive of over 900 current and historic USO reports. According to Feint, one of the 20th century's first cases was reported in detail in the Philadelphia Inquirer on August 1st, 1904. A British cargo ship, the Mohican, en route to Philadelphia was, according to the paper, enshrouded in a strange metallic vapor which glowed like phosphorus.
I have found out recently that that case is a heck of a lot more detailed and scary than originally shown. The captain and the crew confirmed that an object came across the ocean, a cloud, approached the ship, and it was glowing. Not a meteor, going straight down, just coming across the sea. As it came towards the ship, The captain was trying to distract the crew to get them to do something different, you know, and get over the fear. They couldn't move anything while the cloud was around the ship.
The Inquirer further reports that during the event, the ship's compass revolved with the speed of an electric motor, and the sailors were unable to raise pieces of steel from the magnetized decks. The story goes on to quote the Mohican's Captain Urquhart, who confirms that the account is vouched for by every man of the crew. But perhaps the most astounding USO-related event, according to experts, is a Canadian case from 1967.
The Shag Harbor case is the most important USO case in documentation. The UFO moved underwater to a different point. A second UFO joined it.
Coming up, we visit Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia on the 38th anniversary of this crucial USO incident.
On October the 4th, 1967. That's where the lights was, right behind me on the water.
Years ago today, October 4th, 1967, approximately 20 after 11 in the evening, something happened in Shag Harbor that became quite memorable in later years.
The night of October 4th, 67 has become known as the night of the UFOs among many UFO researchers. The Shag Harbor incident has become the best known aspect of that night.
Chris Stiles and Don Ledger have spent the past decade researching the 1967 Shag Harbor USO incident. The case, widely reported throughout Canada at the time, had been largely forgotten in subsequent years. Their 2001 book, Dark Object, reopened the case, shedding new light on the many reported USO events of that night and the weeks following.
The reason that the Shag Harbor incident came to the forefront and kind of eclipsed the importance of the other sightings from the night of the UFOs is simply the fact that it's the one case where something came down out of the sky and crashed into the water. You know, it made a noise, it made a flash. It's also unique in the sense that nobody reported a UFO. Several calls came in very quickly to the nearby Royal Canadian Mounted Police Detachment, and those reports said simply that people had seen lights, or perhaps an aircraft had crashed into the waters of what they called the Sound. The interest and the concern was totally for the possibility of survivors. Nobody reported a UFO.
I'm not surprised now that I had seen something in the sky that night, because all over Nova Scotia, the night of the Shag Harbor incident, there were many UFO reports.
Just up around the bend, we'll be coming into Shag Harbor, and the site crowd gathered and watched whatever it was that happened here 38 years ago today.
Each year, Ledger and Stiles make an anniversary trip to Shag Harbor to meet with Norm Smith, one of only 3 surviving witnesses.
See the island out there? That's where it all took place, right off there. That's where we seen the light in the water.
Hey, sir. How you been?
Good.
Wow.
How are you?
Same old, isn't it?
The 3 of us stood on the lawn watching the lights. Eventually it started going, it looked like it was moving to us, and then on a downward slope towards the ground. We thought it was a plane crash. So we jumped in the vehicle in my old man's car and my uncle's, and we went up to this spot right here by the Irish Moss plant. And when we got here, there was probably 10, 12 other people. We watched the lights on the water for a period of 2 or 3 minutes, and then the lights disappeared.
What happens next is indisputable. Before midnight on Wednesday, October 4th, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers who witnessed the event from the shoreline searched the water on boats until 3 a.m. with the help of several local fishermen, including Norm Smith. At noon on Friday, October 6th, Canadian Navy divers from Halifax arrive and search the area through the weekend.
Eventually, 7 divers were dispatched from the Fleet Diving Unit in Halifax and taken down to Shag Harbor. The search effort continued through all the daylight hours of Saturday and Sunday,
And by Monday morning, that search was officially terminated in Ottawa. And they just simply state unidentified flying object and circle it and underline it.
According to government reports, the object travels from the south to the north along the Nova Scotia shoreline. At one point, it stops and hovers. Then at approximately 11:20 p.m., it enters the water at a 45-degree angle, 300 yards offshore.
Directly behind me where we seen the lights, right at Bomb Portage Island, directly behind me.
When the Royal Canadian Mounted Police officers that had responded to the call arrived at the shoreline of Old Highway number 3, the UFO was still moving upon the surface of the water. The object also appeared to be leaving a trail of dense yellow foam.
In the weeks following October 4th, the story becomes even more mysterious. The case is front-page news across Canada. And as Ledger and Stiles report in their book, in the days just prior to the Canadian military's official classification of this incident as a UFO event, a second craft enters the waters of Nova Scotia to rendezvous with the first craft.
Then this thing resumed its headway back down this way at about 4,400 miles an hour and came down through northern New Brunswick, right down over the Bay of Fundy, across the southwestern tip of Nova Scotia, across this way, and went down in the water here.
Authorities already knew the object was no longer there, that it had moved under the water and had come to rest on the seabed. It sat there for almost a week, right to the hour. And after that time, it began moving under the water to the Gulf of Maine with the aid of a second craft that was helping repair it. And the two of them broke the surface of the water and flew away out over the Gulf of Maine. Interestingly enough, there is a second report of a sighting 1 week in Shag Harbor of two sets of lights, one orange, one yellow, leaving the water and flying away.
This case continues to inspire debate and continued research into the events of October 4th, 1967.
There are a large amount of primary documents that support interpreting Shag Harbor as a crash scenario of the UFO. And in one of the paragraphs, it actually says a preliminary investigation has been conducted, and it has been discovered that this object is not the result of a flare, float, downed aircraft, or in fact any known object.
I didn't know then, back 30-odd years ago, I didn't know whether it was a UFO or what it was. But nobody will ever make me believe that there was nothing there, because it was.
Coming up, seen for the first time, video evidence of what might possibly be a USO emerging from the waters of Laguna Cartagena in Puerto Rico.
And they are coming towards Laguna Cartagena.
And later, a University of California scientist reveals that supersonic speed by deep-sea UFOs is not only scientifically possible, but likely. A region with perhaps the longest legacy of USO activity is the area around Puerto Rico. As the mysterious southern point of the Bermuda Triangle, the island has been at the center of USO debate for decades.
Puerto Rico is a hot spot for underwater UFO activity, and it seems to match the pattern of other cases.
Puerto Rico is considered in all of the Americas to be the place where there's the greatest number of USO sightings.
Members of the Puerto Rican-based ufology group, Project Argus, agreed to lead a tour of some of the island's more notable USO-related areas. Laguna Cartagena is an isolated lake near the southwestern corner of the island. It has become linked to much of Puerto Rico's reported USO activity.
I have been conducting investigations for years in Laguna Cartagena, where there's also a lot of secrecy about USOs.
Laguna Cartagena since 1930 has been a place where hundreds of cases were reported of flying objects coming and going from the area.
October 8, 2002, approximately 9 p.m., Puerto Rican police officer and Project Argus member Carlos Torres witnesses a red glowing USO fly out of the waters of Laguna Cartagena at an incredible speed. Then it stops and hovers just above the water.
I was a witness of an object suspended over Laguna Cartagena. The military got involved because they were also witnesses. The object flew away and then back from Monte Indio. And it stopped and hovered over Laguna Cartagena.
exactamente encima de la laguna Cartagena.
After hovering for several minutes over the area, the object was seen to crash back into the lake. Another Argus member, Giuseppe Quiñones, believes he captured the same object on videotape in 2004.
I took a video on November 20th, 2004, in the immediate area of Laguna Cartagena.
Seen for the first time, possible video evidence of a USO near this enigmatic lake. The brightly lit, craft-like object was seen emerging from the water. Here, it hovers for almost 1 minute before flying away.
In the mid-1990s, several attempts to disprove the USO activities were made, despite hundreds of witnesses that said they saw lights going in and coming out of the water. They have been seen all over Puerto Rico. Specifically, the most mentioned places are Laguna Cartagena and Route 303.
The region of Lajas, through which Route 303 runs, has been another source of significant USO and UFO reports, including a possible 1997 crash on Monte Indio that left behind a scorched earth impact zone and many unanswered questions.
In May 5, 1997, a UFO crashed there, burned many lands on the top of the mountains, and there was federals that night, and they obtained something that we don't know, a UFO.
After this 1997 incident, local government officials began to take USO and UFO reports more seriously. As a direct result, the mayor of Lajas, Puerto Rico, recently designated the roadway through the heart of Puerto Rico's UFO country as UFO Route 303. But for now, other USO-related events around the island are far more pressing for experts. In the hills around Lajas, a mysterious government aerostat, a tethered balloon-borne radar, is frequently launched up to 3 miles in the air, ostensibly to monitor air traffic and weather. However, USO researchers believe the balloon's real function is actually covert, to observe and record UFO and USO activity.
There is a government document in the legislature where a secret investigation was conducted. Not public, but secret, about the USO events in the waters. But the document states that they do not pose any danger to humanity.
The volume of USO reports from around this small island have prompted many to speculate that the deep waters directly below the southern tip of the Bermuda Triangle, just offshore, conceal more than USOs. Experts and researchers from around the world believe they possibly obscure a major USO base as well.
It is suspected that there's a base between La Paguera in an area near Cabo Rojo. It is also supposedly very deep and cavernous, and it goes as far as Laguna Cartagena.
The motive for them coming in and out of the water is so that they are able to enter in one area and come out in a different area in the underwater basins.
Could all of these events simply be tied to local mysticism, or perhaps the cultural sway of the Bermuda Triangle?
In Puerto Rican culture, the majority of the people here, even though they talk about the Chupacabra and the Bermuda Triangle, they do not believe in any of this.
Or is there possibly something more?
It's a reality. The USOs in Puerto Rico are real. There are hundreds of testimonies and witnesses. It's all real.
I think that the UFO phenomenon is real. Here in Puerto Rico, there have been hundreds of cases. That is a reality.
Coming up, possible photographic evidence of a USO exiting the waters of Gulf Breeze, Florida. It is believed that unidentified submerged objects are able to move through our oceans and seas in ways that defy all principles of modern physics. Experts are confounded by the ability of these vessels to reportedly travel at extreme depths, pass through ice with impunity, and traverse water at supersonic speed.
These kinds of craft, ostensibly, can travel underneath the water because they are impervious to water, just like they're impervious to gamma rays, cosmic rays, impervious to anything that gets in the way of their traveling in space.
According to all information, we are dealing with a very advanced technology.
They circle ships and next thing you know, dive into the water. It's not a barrier to them. They just go from one medium to another.
In late 1969, while conducting their regular Operation Deep Freeze ice-breaking exercises near Antarctica, U.S. Navy sailors aboard the USS Calcaterra reportedly witnessed an unidentified submerged object with some extraordinary capabilities.
Ivan Sanderson in Argosy magazine, where he talks about an event somewhere in the Arctic when an object came up through the ice and took off. Really sort of burrowed its way through.
A large submarine-shaped object, at least 100 feet long, is seen bursting out of the frozen ocean through several yards of solid ice at an incredible speed. But this case, however, is only one of many similar incidents reported by navies around the world.
I know
of one case that occurred near Leningrad. In the winter of 1976. A USO broke down through the ice, maneuvered underwater, and then again broke back out through the ice.
They do melt ice. Now, if you had a meteor, the dynamics of the thing would break the ice into chunks and scatter them all over the place. With the UFO, it's a clean hole.
USO witnesses have also reported seeing waterspouts beneath USOs as they exit the water, including Ed Walters, a resident of Gulf Breeze, Florida, who snapped this never-before-seen Polaroid picture of what appears to be a USO above a tornado-shaped waterspout on July 7th, 1988.
So he was looking north towards the Gulf Breeze across the Santa Rosa Sound, a distance of about 7,000 feet. He noticed that the water down beneath the object started to get all foamy or something. You could see it dancing around, and all of a sudden this column of water went up and contacted the bottom of it. The picture that he took actually shows that.
Such cases have caused some experts to assert that USOs might possibly use water as a fuel source.
There are those who feel that water is essential for the fusion process.
There are a lot of cases where UFOs hover over reservoirs and small bodies of water, not only large bodies of water. It does seem to be some evidence that they can use water to help their craft in some way.
They may use water as a fuel. When these cases where they talk about objects hovering over the water and seeming to suck water up in, certainly sounds like they need a big drink or something to keep going.
Modern scientific theories abound about how USOs developed the ability to propel themselves through water with great efficiency. Researchers envision everything from massive jet-like propulsion systems to frictionless bubbles that cocoon the objects.
So the engines wouldn't be engines as you and I would imagine engines. They would be generators, generating a magnetic force, creating a magnetic envelope around the craft that repels the Earth's natural magnetism, hence allowing them to accelerate, decelerate, climb, fall, and navigate through the water.
By exerting forces at the surrounding fluid, seawater, nice electrically conducting fluid, you control the drag, you control the flow, the speed, the lift. You can get around all the problems of high-speed motion under the water. A magneto-aerodynamic system would work similar to the electromagnetic submarine that was successfully tested.
An electromagnetic submarine was in fact built and tested by the University of California, Santa Barbara in the mid-1960s. It took advantage of saltwater's natural ability to conduct electricity.
The first successful test of an electromagnetic propulsion system was conducted on Earth in 1966, when this electromagnetic submarine was first demonstrated. This electromagnetic submarine moves through the water as a result of electromagnetic forces. It has absolutely no moving parts.
The principle here is that seawater is an electrically conducting fluid. You push against the seawater by Newton's laws, elementary physics, it pushes back. And off you go.
Is it possible that USOs take advantage of this natural capability of our oceans to reach supersonic speed?
Water is a great magnetic conduit. In fact, if they were traveling using a process called diamagnetism, which is a weak repellent force, then water would enhance that force, which would explain why these craft are able to navigate in water so well.
One researcher theorizes that USOs might move rapidly through the water and avoid catastrophic damage using the same principles as a common light bulb.
UFO is the filament in this particular case, and the bulb is the field, and that protects the UFO. It keeps the water from coming onto it when it goes in. They move it, though, and it never touches the UFO.
And that can be achieved by creating so-called supercavitating bubble around the whole object. In that way, whole object travels together with a bubble of water vapor.
Marko Princevac is a professor of mechanical engineering at the University of California, Riverside. He devised an experiment for the History Channel demonstrating the physics behind possible supersonic movement through the water.
Basically, the only thing that you can play with is a shape of a vehicle. And it will deviate from standard shapes of a submarine.
To demonstrate how different shapes can produce the conditions for supersonic underwater travel, Princevac and his team force an underwater current along with green dye and high-powered lasers around different submersed objects.
So if we have something called a streamlined body, we see that fluid flows undisturbedly around that body.
This red streamlined object represents the perfect shape for a fast-moving underwater vessel. In direct contrast, the cube that is tested creates massive resistance all around the object.
A good shape for an underwater supercavitating vehicle would be something similar to a return capsule of Soyuz or other space missions.
The laws of earthly physics change dramatically underwater. Propelling an oceanic vehicle to supersonic speeds requires an amount of power greater than what man has currently invented.
A vehicle that has a 5-foot diameter and we want to go at the speed of sound in the air, we would need an engine that can produce 15,000 horsepower. For the same vehicle to reach the speed of sound under the water, we would need an engine that can produce around 1 million horsepower.
While it might be scientifically possible for USOs to prowl the oceans at supersonic speed, how have these craft developed the technology required to achieve this milestone? The many mysteries of these craft may never be fully understood, and that is exactly what provokes the greatest debate and distress among investigators and researchers.
I think it's easier for us to land a man on the moon or even create a moon base than to land a man on the bottom of the ocean.
If they're hostile and have come here to conquer Earth, they would have done it 1,000,000 years ago. We might be their creations for all we know. The Earth is conquered, we work for them, they live here, this is their planet.
Oh my God, I know that's a plane. Oh, Jesus, please be a plane.
What the hell was that? Midway across the Hercules,
In our history, the first time we're studying something that's studying us.
Something fired a beam of light during a circle, you can imagine, circling our warhead. Fired another warhead.